I'm Maya, 29, lying broken in a hospital bed after a driver ran a red light and T-boned my car yesterday. 2 surgeries, 6 broken bones, and countless bruises later, I keep checking my silent phone, waiting. Then the message finally comes. We're at Ethan's award ceremony. It's an important night for him. We'll try to visit next weekend. My own parents chose my brother's academic award over their daughter's near-death experience. Some wounds heal. This one never will. If you're watching this, I'd love to know where you're viewing from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. Let me know in the comments if you've experienced family disappointment. Yum. Your stories help all of us feel less alone. Growing up in our pristine colonial house in suburban Minneapolis, I learned early that being the firstborn didn't make me the favorite. From the beginning, my parents, Elizabeth and Robert Washington, set the bar impossibly high. Mom was a corporate attorney who made partner by 35, and Dad managed investment portfolios for clients with 8-figure net worths. Excellence wasn't celebrated in our household. It was expected. I was 3 years old when Ethan was born. I have a faded photograph of myself peering into his bassinet, my small hand reaching out to touch his. Mom says I was protective from the start, but looking back at those early photos now, I wonder if I somehow sensed he would be the one who would fulfill my parents' ambitions in ways I never could. The pattern emerged before either of us started elementary school. Ethan could recite the alphabet backward at age 3. I was artistic, constantly drawing and creating, but that didn't register on my parents' achievement scale. When I proudly showed my mother a drawing I'd made of our family, she glanced at it briefly before returning to her brief preparations. "That's nice, Maya. Put it on the refrigerator if you want." But when Ethan correctly identified all the capitals of all 50 states at age 4, my parents threw a party inviting the neighbors to witness his performance. School only reinforced the dynamic. I was a solid B-plus student who excelled in art and creative writing. Ethan was a straight A student who particularly shined in math and science. My report cards earned brief nods of acknowledgement. Ethan's were framed. "Your brother has a true gift," my mother would say. "He could change the world someday." The message, though never stated directly, was clear. My brother was exceptional. I was merely adequate. When I was 12, I made it to the regional art competition with a watercolor painting of Lake Harriet at sunset. The exhibition was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon in May. That same weekend, Ethan, then 9, had qualified for a state-level mathematics competition. "We're so proud of you, Maya," my father said the night before, "but we'll have to miss your art show. Ethan's competition is a really big deal. Mrs. Lawson from next door said she can take you." I nodded, swallowing my disappointment. Mrs. Lawson was nice enough, but she wasn't my parents. And when my painting won second place, she took a photo to show my parents, who responded with a quick, "That's wonderful, honey," before returning to their excited chatter about Ethan's first place medal. By high school, I'd learned to manage my expectations. I stopped inviting my parents to my choir performances and art exhibitions. I became self-sufficient, driving myself to activities, signing my own permission slips when I could get away with it. I built a circle of friends who appreciated my creative spirit and dry sense of humor, creating a chosen family to fill the void my biological one left. The college application process crystallized everything. My parents hired a specialized tutor for Ethan when he was still in middle school, planning his advanced placement courses and extracurriculars to maximize his chances at the Ivy League. For me, they suggested the State University, which was perfectly adequate for an art degree. Through determination and countless late nights working on my portfolio, I earned a scholarship to the Art Institute of Chicago. My parents seemed surprised, almost as if they hadn't considered I might aim higher than their expectations. "Chicago," my mother had said, reviewing my acceptance letter. "That's pretty far away." "That's kind of the point," I replied, immediately regretting the honesty. But in that moment, my mother's slightly hurt expression suggested she might have glimpsed the damage done by years of being the family afterthought. Moving to Chicago for college felt like taking my first full breath after years of shallow breathing. Away from the shadow of my brother's achievements and my parents' expectations, I could finally figure out who I was on my own terms. I discovered a passion for graphic design, merging my artistic talents with marketable skills. I made friends who didn't know me as Ethan's sister, but simply as Maya, creative, sarcastic, loyal Maya. I still went home for major holidays, sitting through dinners dominated by updates on Ethan's latest achievements at MIT. I'd share my own accomplishments, making Dean's List, winning a design competition, securing a prestigious internship, only to watch my parents' eyes glaze over before redirecting the conversation back to Ethan. Did we tell you Ethan's professor thinks his research could be published? My mother would interject, barely acknowledging my news. Over time, I built a protective shell around my heart. I learned to expect nothing to find validation in my own achievements and the appreciation of people who truly saw me. But deep down, a small part of me never stopped hoping that someday my parents would look at me with the same pride they reserved for my brother. That childish hope persisted even as I built my adult life in Chicago. Even as I understood intellectually that the pattern was too deeply entrenched to change, part of me still believed that if I achieved enough, if I proved my worth conclusively enough, they would finally see me. It was that stubborn hope that made their choice after my accident so devastating. Because despite everything, despite all evidence to the contrary, I never truly believed they would fail to show up when it truly mattered. I never believed they would choose Ethan's moment of glory over my moment of desperate need. But they did, and that choice changed everything. By 29, I had built a life that I was proud of, even if my parents weren't particularly impressed. After graduating from the Art Institute, I'd worked my way up from junior designer to senior graphic designer at Meridian Marketing, a mid-sized agency in downtown Chicago. My work had won several industry awards, and I'd recently been promoted to lead the creative team for some of our biggest clients. My apartment in Wicker Park wasn't large, but it was entirely mine, filled with artwork from local artists. I admired vintage furniture I'd lovingly restored, and plants that somehow thrived despite my inconsistent watering schedule. I shared the two-bedroom with my best friend Zoe, whom I'd met during my internship days, and who now worked as a UX designer for a tech startup. Zoe was more than a roommate, she was the sister I'd never had. Where Ethan and I had grown up in the same house but existed in separate orbits, Zoe and I had built a friendship based on mutual respect, shared humor, and genuine interest in each other's lives. She celebrated my successes wholeheartedly and supported me through disappointments without ever making them about herself. "Your parents are idiots for not recognizing how amazing you are," she would say when I returned from particularly deflating family visits. Their loss. My dating life was less successful than my professional one. I'd recently ended a 2-year relationship with Justin, who never quite understood why family gatherings left me so drained. "They're your parents," he'd say, frustrated by my reluctance to spend time with them. "Family is everything." That simple statement revealed the gulf between us. For Justin, who came from a close-knit family where support was unconditional and love was demonstrated daily, my family dynamic was incomprehensible. He couldn't understand that for some of us, family was a complicated web of obligation, disappointment, and occasional bright moments of connection that kept hope painfully alive. Despite the distance I'd created, I maintained regular contact with my family. The Sunday evening phone call with my mother had become a ritual predictable in both content and emotional impact. She would run through updates about family friends. I barely remembered neighborhood changes I no longer cared about, and inevitably Ethan's latest accomplishments. My brother had completed his PhD in biochemistry at 25 and now worked as a research scientist at a prestigious university laboratory, developing treatments for rare genetic disorders. His work was important, potentially life-saving, and I was genuinely proud of him. The problem wasn't Ethan's success. It was my parents' inability to acknowledge that my different path might also have value. Ethan's been selected to present at the International Science Foundation conference. My mother announced during our call the Sunday before my accident. They're giving him an award for his breakthrough research on enzyme therapy. "We're flying out for the ceremony on Thursday." "That's great," I said automatically. "Tell him congratulations from me." "You could tell him yourself, you know. He mentions that you rarely call him." I sighed. "Mom, I texted him on his birthday last month, and we had a nice chat. We're both busy adults." Well, he makes time for family, she replied, the implication clear in her tone. I let it go as I always did. Arguing would only extend the call, and I had designs to finish before Monday morning. How's your job? She asked her obligatory inquiry about my life. Actually, I just got put in charge of rebranding for Nature Tech, that sustainable technology company I told you about. It's a huge account. That's nice, dear, she said, her voice already distracted. Oh, before I forget, did I tell you that Mrs. Peterson's daughter is getting married? You remember Laura, don't you? She's a doctor now. And just like that, my professional achievement was dismissed, and we were back to talking about people I hadn't seen in 15 years. By the time we hung up, I felt the familiar hollowness that these conversations always left. Zoe found me staring blankly at my laptop afterward, unable to focus on my work. Sunday call with Elizabeth the Great? She asked, plopping down beside me on the couch. I nodded. Ethan's receiving some big award this Thursday. They're flying out to see him. Of course they are. Zoe rolled her eyes. Heaven forbid they miss another opportunity to worship at the altar of their golden child. I laughed despite myself. It's fine. His work is actually important. So is yours, Zoe insisted. You're literally changing how people see and interact with brands that affect their daily lives. I shrugged. Try explaining that to my mother. In her world, if you're not saving lives or making millions, you're just passing time. Well, her world sounds boring and limited, Zoe declared. Now, are we ordering Thai food or pizza for our Sunday night pity party? That was Sunday. By Thursday afternoon, everything had changed. The day had started normally enough. I woke early, went for a run along the lakefront, showered, and headed to the office. We had an important client presentation scheduled for 2 o'clock, and I spent the morning finalizing my pitch-tweaking visuals and rehearsing key points. The weather forecast had predicted afternoon storms, and by noon, dark clouds were gathering over the city. I grabbed lunch at the deli across from our office building, barely tasting my sandwich as I mentally reviewed my presentation. By 1:30, rain was falling in heavy sheets, drumming against the windows of our conference room as I set up my laptop and arranged handouts. At 1:45, my phone buzzed with a text from our client. Running 15 minutes late due to weather. So sorry. I texted back a reassurance that it was no problem, and decided to use the extra time to run to the supply closet for more folders. That decision, that simple mundane decision to walk down the hallway for folders, is one I've replayed countless times. If I had stayed in the conference room, if the client had been on time, if it hadn't been raining, so many small factors that might have changed everything. But at 2 o'clock, I was in my car driving to our client's office instead. The presentation materials had been left behind by another team member, and since the client was running late anyway, I volunteered to retrieve them. The rain had intensified, reducing visibility and turning the streets into slick, reflective surfaces. I drove cautiously, wipers on high, leaning forward, as if those few extra inches might help me see better through the downpour. I was halfway to the client's office, stopped at a red light on Michigan Avenue when it happened. I was checking the GPS on my phone when a horn blared startlingly close. I looked up in time to see headlights approaching from my right. At alarming speed, a blue sedan skidding through the intersection, unable to stop on the wet pavement. There was no time to react. The impact came with a deafening crash of metal and breaking glass. My car spun violently, airbags exploding in my face with a force that felt like being punched by a heavyweight boxer. Pain shot through my left leg and side. My head snapped forward, then back against the headrest. And then silence. Or not silence exactly, but a muffled underwater quality to all sounds. Rain pattering on crushed metal. A car alarm wailing somewhere nearby. People shouting, their voices distorted as if coming from very far away. I don't remember much of what happened next. Fragmented images remain of firefighters' concerned face peering through the shattered window. The metallic grinding as they use the jaws of life to cut through the driver's side door. The cold rain on my face as they finally extracted me from the wreckage. The swaying motion of being transferred to a stretcher. I came back to full awareness in the ambulance, an oxygen mask on my face, and a paramedic leaning over me. Maya, can you hear me? You've been in an accident. We're taking you to Northwestern Memorial Hospital. I tried to speak, but my mouth was dry and pain radiated from seemingly everywhere at once. Try not to move, the paramedic advised. You've got a broken leg, possibly some broken ribs, and a likely concussion. We've stabilized you, but you'll need further treatment at the hospital. A different kind of panic set in, then not the immediate terror of the accident, but the creeping anxiety of its implications. Work, the presentation, my apartment, bills, all the ordinary concerns that suddenly seemed both trivial and overwhelming. My phone, I managed to croak out. Need to call. We've got your phone, the paramedic assured me. It survived the crash. Once we get you stabilized at the hospital, you can make calls. The emergency room was a blur of bright lights, urgent voices, and sharp pain as doctors assessed my injuries. X-rays confirmed multiple fractures in my left leg, 2 broken ribs, and a hairline fracture in my right wrist. The concussion was mild, fortunately, but would require monitoring. They gave me something for the pain that made the edges of reality soften and blur. A kind-faced nurse named Layla helped me make necessary calls once I was somewhat stabilized. Zoe was first. She answered on the second ring. Zoe, I said, my voice breaking. I've been in an accident. I'm at Northwestern Memorial. Oh, my God, she gasped. How bad are you? Okay? Broken bones. They're admitting me. Surgery, probably. I'm on my way, right now, 20 minutes tops. Next, we called my office to explain what had happened. My boss was understanding, immediately concerned about my well-being, rather than the missed presentation. And then, with a deep breath, I gave Layla my parents' number. Would you like me to speak with them? She offered. I shook my head. No, I can do it. But can you stay? She nodded, her hand warm on my uninjured arm as the phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times, then voicemail. You've reached Elizabeth and Robert Washington. Please leave a message. I swallowed hard. Mom, Dad, it's Maya. I've been in a car accident in Chicago. I'm at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. It's serious broken leg ribs concussion. They're admitting me and talking about surgery. I could really use you here. Please call me when you get this. After hanging up, I stared at the ceiling, fighting back tears. They were probably already at Ethan's award ceremony. They would call when they got the message. Of course they would. Hours passed. I was admitted to the orthopedic floor after CT scans and preliminary treatments. Zoe arrived white-faced and frantic, calming only slightly when she saw I was conscious and relatively stable. Jesus, Maya, she said, carefully taking my uninjured hand. You scared the life out of me. You should see the other guy, I joked weakly. Not funny, she said, but smiled despite herself. What happened? I explained what I could remember about the accident. Have your parents called back yet? She asked. I shook my head, and something in my expression must have revealed my growing fear that they wouldn't. They're probably just on a plane or something, Zoe said, but her tone lacked conviction. The orthopedic surgeon came by to explain that I would need surgery to repair my leg, a rod and screws to stabilize the femur fracture. They scheduled it for first thing in the morning. Evening came. Zoe stepped out briefly to bring back a few essentials from our apartment. I checked my phone again, no calls, no texts from my parents. I tried calling again. Voicemail. It was after 9 when my phone finally buzzed with a text message. My heart leapt, then immediately plummeted as I read the words, "Just got your message, so sorry to hear about the accident. Unfortunately, we're at Ethan's award ceremony for his research breakthrough. It's a really important night for him. We'll try to visit next weekend. Your father sends his love." I stared at the message for a long time, reading and rereading it as if the words might somehow rearrange themselves into something less hurtful. They didn't. When Zoe returned with my toothbrush and pajamas, she found me silent, tears streaming down my face. What happened? Are you in pain? Should I call the nurse? Wordlessly, I handed her my phone. She read the message, her expression changing from concern to disbelief to outrage. They're not coming because of Ethan's award ceremony. Her voice rose incredulously. You're in the hospital with broken bones and they're at a fucking award dinner. I closed my eyes, too exhausted and heartsick to even respond. That's it, Zoe declared. I'm officially adopting you. You're my sister now. Those people don't deserve you. She stayed with me that night, somehow contorting her 5'9" frame into the uncomfortable visitor's chair, refusing to leave despite my insistence that she should go home and sleep in a real bed. "Family stays," she said firmly, "and I'm your family." As the pain medication pulled me toward uneasy sleep, I held on to those words like a lifeline. Family stays. My parents had made their choice, and it wasn't me. Never me. It shouldn't have surprised me. It shouldn't have hurt as much as it did. But lying there in that hospital bed, broken and vulnerable, I realized that some small stubborn part of me had still believed that when it really mattered, when I truly needed them, my parents would show up. I had been wrong. The next morning brought pain physical and emotional as the medication wore off. Nurses came to prep me for surgery, explaining procedures and risks with practiced efficiency. I signed consent forms with my uninjured hand, the pen feeling impossibly heavy. Zoe had stepped out to call her boss and explained that she would be working remotely for the day. In her absence, I checked my phone again. There was another text from my mother sent at 7:15 a.m. The ceremony was wonderful. Ethan's research is being called groundbreaking. Attaching a few photos from the event, the president of the university presented the award personally. "How are you feeling today? Did they give you good pain medication?" Attached were 3 photos, Ethan in a suit accepting a plaque, my parents standing proudly beside him, and a group shot of Ethan with several distinguished-looking academics. Everyone smiling, everyone celebrating. While I lay in a hospital bed waiting for surgery, the disconnect was so profound, it almost felt like a dark comedy. My mother's casual, "How are you feeling?" tacked on as an afterthought. No mention of when they might visit. No acknowledgement of the severity of my situation or the magnitude of their absence. I didn't respond. What could I possibly say? Zoe returned as they were preparing to take me to surgery, her expression darkening as she saw my face. "What now?" she asked. "Mom sent pictures from the ceremony," I said flatly. "Ethan looks nice in his suit." Zoe's hands balled into fists. "Give me your phone. I'm blocking their numbers." "Don't," I said, surprising myself. Just leave it." The surgery lasted 3 hours. I woke in the recovery room groggy and disoriented to find Zoe still there now, accompanied by my coworker Devin, who had brought a card signed by everyone at the office. The next few days passed in a haze of pain, medication, physical discomfort, and the humiliating helplessness that comes with serious injury. I needed assistance for the most basic functions, using the bedpan, washing, even shifting position in bed. The night nurse Layla became a source of genuine comfort during those dark, painful hours when sleep eluded me. "You remind me of my daughter," she told me on the second night, gently helping me change positions. "She's an artist too." "Where is she now?" I asked, grateful for the distraction from pain. "She lives in Seattle, graphic design like you. I don't see her as often as I'd like, but we video chat every Sunday no matter what." "You must miss her." "Every day," Layla said simply. "If she were in the hospital, wild horses couldn't keep me away." The comment wasn't meant as a dig at my situation, but it stung nonetheless. I turned my face away, but not before Layla noticed the change in my expression. "I'm sorry," she said gently. "Your parents have other priorities." I finished for her. Layla didn't offer platitudes or try to make excuses for my parents' absence. Instead, she squeezed my hand and said, "Then it's their loss. Truly." By the weekend, the time my parents had vaguely suggested they might visit, I had developed a routine of sorts. Morning rounds, physical therapy exercises, in bed lunch, more PT visits from friends and coworkers, dinner, evening meds, and the long night hours with Layla. Zoe came every day after work and spent each night in the visitor's chair despite my protests. Saturday morning, I received a call from my father. "Maya," he said, his voice carrying the familiar mix of awkwardness and formality he always used with me. "How are you feeling?" "I've been better," I replied, trying to keep bitterness from my voice. "Are you and Mom on your way?" There was a telling pause. "That's why I'm calling. Your mother has come down with a terrible migraine, and I don't think she's up for traveling today. We're going to have to postpone our visit." Of course they were. I closed my eyes, not trusting myself to speak immediately. "Maya, are you there? I'm here, I finally managed. It's fine, I understand. We'll try for next weekend, he said, relief evident in his voice. Ethan is giving a presentation at his university on Sunday, but we could potentially come Saturday. Something snapped inside me. 5 days in the hospital, major surgery, and I was still an afterthought to be squeezed in around Ethan's schedule. Don't bother, I said, my voice suddenly steady. I'm clearly not a priority. That's not fair, Maya. Your mother is genuinely ill, and we would have found a way to be here if it was Ethan in this hospital bed. I finished for him. We both know that's true. Now you're being childish, my father said, his tone shifting to the dismissive one I knew so well. This kind of emotional manipulation isn't helpful. Manipulation, I repeated, anger rising. I'm lying in a hospital bed with a metal rod in my leg, broken ribs, and a fractured wrist. I haven't manipulated anything. I just had the misfortune of having my accident coincide with another opportunity to celebrate Ethan. You've always been jealous of your brother's accomplishments, he said, and the unfairness of the accusation took my breath away. I've never been jealous of Ethan, I said when I could speak again. I've been invisible because of Ethan. There's a difference. I don't know where this is coming from, but when you've calmed down and are thinking more rationally— Don't, I interrupted. Don't dismiss my feelings as irrational. This isn't just about this week. This is about a lifetime of being the afterthought, the also-ran, the one whose achievements weren't quite impressive enough to merit real attention. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. We love you, Maya, my father finally said, his voice stiff. We've always supported you. You've provided for me, I corrected him. That's not the same thing as supporting me. Another silence. Then, I should let you rest. We'll talk when you're feeling better. After he hung up, I lay staring at the ceiling, my heart racing with the adrenaline of finally saying what I'd held back for so long. It didn't feel triumphant or liberating. It just felt sad. Sad that it had taken a near-fatal accident and their subsequent absence to finally push me to speak my truth. Zoe found me like that an hour later, still staring upward, tear tracks dried on my cheeks. What happened? She asked, instantly alert to my distress. I told her about the call, about the postponed visit, about the confrontation. Good for you, she said fiercely. It's about time they heard the truth. It doesn't change anything, I pointed out. Maybe not for them, Zoe agreed. But for you, standing up for yourself matters, Maya. Acknowledging the truth matters. Later that day, I received a text from Ethan. Just heard about your accident. I'm so sorry. Are you okay? It was the first time I'd heard from my brother since the accident. I wondered if my parents had even told him immediately, or if they'd waited until after his moment in the spotlight. Surgery went well, I texted back, but recovery will be long. Mom and Dad said they're visiting next weekend. They were supposed to come today. Mom has a migraine. There was a long pause before his next message. I didn't know that. I'm presenting my research on Sunday, but I could try to come see you before that. The offer, while appreciated, underscored the fundamental problem. Even Ethan, who was generally decent, if oblivious, saw visiting his seriously injured sister as something to fit in around his professional obligations. Don't worry about it, I replied. Focus on your presentation. I've got good friends taking care of me. If you're sure, he texted back, and I could almost feel his relief through the phone. I'm sure, I confirmed, and realized with sudden clarity that I truly was. I didn't need them, any of them. I had built a support system of people who showed up, who prioritized me, who saw me as valuable and worthy of their time and attention. People like Zoe, who had barely left my side. Like Layla, who treated me with maternal kindness despite being a stranger days ago. Like my coworkers, who had organized a meal delivery schedule for when I was discharged. The realization didn't erase the hurt, but it provided a counterbalance, a reminder that while my biological family might have failed me, my chosen family had not. And perhaps that was the more important connection anyway. The hospital released me after a week with strict instructions for home care and a schedule of follow-up appointments and physical therapy sessions. My injuries would require months of recovery, 6 to 8 weeks, before I could put weight on my leg longer, before I could walk unassisted, and extensive rehabilitation to regain full function. Zoe had spent the days before my discharge transforming our apartment into a space where I could navigate with my new temporary limitations. She moved furniture to create wider pathways for the wheelchair. I would initially need set up a makeshift bedroom in our living room to avoid the stairs to my second-floor bedroom and installed grab bars in the bathroom. "Welcome home," she said as she wheeled me into the apartment. Or "Welcome to Accessibility Central," as I now call it. Our friends had decorated the space with welcome home signs and filled our refrigerator with prepared meals. A large basket of recovery essentials sat on the coffee table: books, magazines, streaming service gift cards, soft socks, and premium hot chocolate. "You guys didn't have to do all this," I said, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness. "Of course we did," said my friend Tariq, who had helped Zoe with the apartment modifications. "That's what friends are for." Those first days at home brought new challenges. Simple tasks became complicated ordeals: showering with plastic wrap around my casts, maneuvering the wheelchair through doorways, dealing with the constant discomfort of healing bones. The pain medication made me foggy, and the enforced inactivity left me restless and frustrated. My parents called occasionally brief conversations that skimmed the surface of my condition, without delving into the emotional fallout of our previous discussion. They sent a large floral arrangement with a generic "Get Well Soon" card, the message written in the florist's handwriting rather than their own. 2 weeks after the accident, Ethan came to visit. He arrived on a Saturday morning looking uncomfortable as he navigated the unfamiliar neighborhood and apartment building. "Wow," he said when he saw me, his eyes widening at the visible evidence of my injuries. "You really got banged up." "That's what happens when a car slams into you at 40 miles an hour, I replied, trying for lightness but hearing the edge in my voice. Ethan sat gingerly on the edge of the sofa, as if afraid he might somehow injure me further by jostling the cushions. "Mom and Dad said you were doing better." "I am, relatively speaking, better than when I was in surgery." An awkward silence fell. We had never been close, Ethan and I, despite growing up in the same household. The age gap in our parents' differential treatment had created a chasm between us that neither of us quite knew how to bridge. "Your award ceremony looked nice," I offered finally. "Congratulations." "Thanks," he said, brightening at the familiar territory. "It was a huge honor. The foundation is going to fund the next stage of my research, which means—" He caught himself perhaps noticing my expression. "Sorry, you probably don't want to hear about all that right now." "It's fine," I said automatically, the response so ingrained I didn't even have to think about it. Ethan fidgeted with the strap of his messenger bag. "Mom and Dad mentioned you were upset that they couldn't visit right away." I let out a short, humorless laugh. That's one way of putting it. "They had committed to attend my ceremony months ago," he said, a defensive note creeping into his voice. "And you know how Mom gets about changing plans." "Ethan," I said carefully, "I was in a car accident. I had emergency surgery. This wasn't about changing dinner reservations." He looked genuinely confused. "But you had good medical care. It's not like you needed them to make medical decisions or anything." And there it was, the fundamental disconnect. In Ethan's world, shaped by our parents' values, practical needs outweighed emotional ones. If I wasn't literally dying without their presence, then their absence wasn't really a problem. "I needed my family," I said simply. "Not for medical decisions. Just to be there. To show that they cared enough to drop everything and come when their daughter was seriously injured." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "They do care. They were worried sick." "Not sick enough to change their plans," I pointed out. "Not sick enough to prioritize me over your award ceremony." "That's not fair," he protested. "My research could help thousands of people with rare genetic disorders. This funding is crucial." "I'm not saying your work isn't important, Ethan. I'm saying that in a family, sometimes personal emergencies take precedence over professional achievements. At least they should." He was quiet for a moment, considering. "I never thought about it that way," he admitted finally. "I guess I guess I'm used to mom and dad making everything about work and achievements. I know, I said, softening slightly. It's not your fault. You didn't create the dynamic. But I benefited from it, he said, surprising me with his insight. And I never really questioned it. We talked for another hour more honestly than we ever had before. Ethan wasn't malicious in his self-focus. He had simply been raised in an environment where his achievements were constantly centered and celebrated. He had never been asked to consider how that affected me, and I had long ago stopped trying to explain it. "I'm sorry, Maya," he said as he prepared to leave. "Not just about the accident, but about everything. I never realized how different our experiences in the same family were. It's not your job to fix it," I told him. "But thank you for listening." After he left, I sat with my sketchbook open on my lap, my hand moving almost of its own accord. I had started drawing during my hospital stay. Rough sketches, at first just to pass the time, but gradually more detailed and deliberate. Art had always been my processing tool, my way of making sense of complicated emotions. Today I found myself drawing a hospital room. My hospital room with its beeping monitors and antiseptic smell. But I drew it empty, the bed neatly made, waiting for visitors who never arrived. I titled it simply, "They Didn't Come." Something about externalizing that moment of abandonment on paper helped me begin to process it. In the days that followed, I continued drawing scenes from the hospital, from my recovery at home, creating a visual journal of this unexpected chapter in my life. Each drawing was a step in my emotional healing, even as my physical recovery continued its slow, painful progression. Zoe found me one evening surrounded by sketches, some tear-stained, but all brutally honest in their depiction of vulnerability and resilience. "These are powerful," she said, carefully examining each one. "You should show them." "They're just for me," I said, "just processing." "They could be for others too," she insisted. "There's something universal here, Maya, about expectations and disappointments, and finding strength in unexpected places." I shook my head, but the seed was planted. I had always kept my most personal art private, but maybe there was value in sharing this journey. Maybe my experience could resonate with others who had faced similar family disappointments. Physical recovery was a marathon, not a sprint. Days of small victories and frustrating setbacks. The first time I managed to shower without Zoe's help. The pain of early physical therapy sessions. Learning to navigate stairs on crutches. Each milestone celebrated by my friends. Each setback met with encouragement and support. My parents finally visited 4 weeks after the accident, when I was already back at work part-time, connecting remotely from my makeshift home office. They arrived with gifts and forced cheerfulness, as if their presence now could erase their absence when I had truly needed them. "The apartment looks nice," my mother commented, glancing around the space that was still rearranged to accommodate my mobility aids. "Though these chairs block the natural flow." "The chairs are so I can navigate with crutches," I explained, trying to keep the edge from my voice. "Of course," she said quickly. "Very practical." My father cleared his throat. "The doctor said you're making good progress. That's excellent news." "Yes," I agreed. "My physical therapist is amazing. Zoe drives me to every appointment." "That's nice of her," my mother said, "though we would have been happy to hire a service to take you." The comment crystallized everything wrong with our relationship. In my parents' world, support meant throwing money at a problem, outsourcing the actual care to others. It meant sending flowers instead of sitting by a hospital bed. It meant offering to hire drivers rather than rearranging their own lives to help. "Zoe doesn't mind," I said simply. "That's what family does." My mother's lips tightened at the implied criticism, but she didn't address it directly. Instead, she changed the subject to Ethan's latest research breakthrough, and we slipped back into our familiar dynamic, me listening, them talking, the emotional distance between us wider than ever, despite our physical proximity. They stayed for exactly 2 hours, then left with promises to call soon to visit again when they could. I knew they wouldn't, not in any meaningful way. And for the first time, I was okay with that. I had stopped expecting what they couldn't or wouldn't give. As my physical strength returned, so did my artistic inspiration. The sketches from my hospital stay evolved into more finished pieces, a series exploring vulnerability, abandonment, and the redefining of family. Zoe continued to encourage me to share them, and eventually I agreed to show them to Devin, who had studied fine arts before moving to graphic design. "These are remarkable," he said, examining each piece with careful attention. "There's such raw emotion here." "Too raw, maybe," I suggested. "No such thing," he countered. "The best art comes from authentic experience. And Maya, I know someone you should meet, a friend who runs a small gallery in Logan Square. She focuses on emerging artists with unique perspectives." "I'm not a gallery artist," I protested. "I'm a graphic designer." "You're both," Devin insisted. "At least show her your work. What's the worst that could happen?" 3 months after the accident, I was walking with a single crutch and had returned to work in the office 2 days a week. The physical pain had diminished to manageable levels, though certain movements still caused sharp reminders of the trauma my body had endured. Devin's gallery owner friend Imani reviewed my hospital series and immediately offered me a spot in an upcoming group show focused on art as healing. "Your work speaks to anyone who has ever felt let down by the people who were supposed to care for them," she said. "It's universal in its specificity." I agreed to participate partly out of curiosity about how others might respond to such personal work, and partly because the process of creating the series had been so cathartic that sharing it felt like the natural next step in my healing journey. The show was scheduled for 6 months after my accident. By then, I had graduated from the crutch to a cane, which I used mainly for longer walks and by the end of tiring days. My physical therapist was pleased with my progress, though she warned that full recovery would take a year or more, and some lingering effects might be permanent. I invited everyone who had supported me through my recovery to the opening: Zoe, Devin, Tariq, Layla, the night nurse who had become a friend, coworkers who had covered my projects during my absence, neighbors who had helped with groceries and errands, my chosen family. After some deliberation, I also invited my parents and Ethan. I didn't expect them to come. My artwork had never been a priority for them, and a small group show in Chicago would hardly register as important enough to warrant the trip from Minneapolis. But extending the invitation felt like offering an olive branch, an opportunity for them to see a part of my life they had largely ignored. To my shock, they RSVP'd yes. "Are you sure?" I asked when my mother called to confirm their attendance. "It's just a small show, not a major exhibition or anything." "Of course we're sure," she said, sounding almost offended by my surprise. "We wouldn't miss your first gallery showing." I was skeptical, but tried to keep an open mind. Perhaps our confrontation had made some impact, however small. Perhaps they were trying in their way to bridge the chasm between us. The night of the opening arrived, and the gallery buzzed with conversation and energy. My series, titled Invisible, occupied a corner of the main room, 9 pieces chronicling my journey from the accident through recovery, with the emotional abandonment by my family as a central theme. The centerpiece was the enlarged, refined version of my first sketch, the empty hospital room, titled They Didn't Come. Zoe stood beside me as visitors examined the work, occasionally leaning in to whisper encouraging words when I seemed overwhelmed by the public exposure of such private pain. And then unexpectedly, my parents arrived, with Ethan trailing behind them. My mother was dressed as if for a gala opening at a major museum, in a designer dress and pearls. My father wore a suit. They looked polished, professional, and completely out of place in the casual artistic atmosphere of the small gallery. I watched as they circled the room, nodding politely at other artwork before making their way to my display. My mother's expression shifted as she took in the subject matter, her composure faltering slightly as she recognized herself in the narrative my art presented. "Maya," she said when they reached me, her voice carefully modulated, "the gallery owner is very impressive. How did you make that connection?" Of course, that would be her first question, not about the art itself, but about the networking opportunity it represented. "Through a coworker," I replied. "What do you think of the work?" My father cleared his throat. "It's very emotional." "That's the point," I said. "Art should evoke emotion." My mother was staring at They Didn't Come, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I think you're being rather dramatic, don't you? Using your art to make us look bad." And there it was, the defensive response I had half expected. No acknowledgement of the hurt, depicted only concern about how they were portrayed. "I'm not trying to make anyone look bad," I said, keeping my voice level. "I'm expressing my experience truthfully." "Your experience is exaggerated for effect," she countered. "We explained why we couldn't come immediately. You were getting excellent medical care. It wasn't as if you were dying." Several nearby guests turned at her raised voice, including Amani, who moved subtly closer, ready to intervene if needed. "It's not about whether I was dying," I said, fighting to maintain my composure. "It was about feeling abandoned when I needed support. It was about the pattern of my entire life crystallized in that one text message. We're at Ethan's award ceremony. When I was lying in a hospital bed after nearly being killed." "You're being unfair," my father interjected. "We've always supported you." "Have you?" I challenged. When? When have you ever put me first? When have you ever celebrated my achievements with the same enthusiasm you show for Ethan's? When have you ever made me feel like I matter as much as he does?" The gallery had grown quiet around us, the other conversations dying as people became unwilling witnesses to our family drama. "This is inappropriate," my mother hissed. "We should discuss this in private." "Why?" I asked, suddenly tired of hiding the truth. "I'm not ashamed of my experience or my art. I'm not ashamed of saying that my parents chose my brother's award ceremony over visiting me in the hospital after a life-threatening accident." My mother's face flushed. "You have no idea what it's like to raise children to balance competing needs." "I wasn't competing for your attention," I interrupted. "I was in the hospital with broken bones and a concussion. There shouldn't have been a choice to make." Zoe placed a supportive hand on my back. Layla, who had arrived earlier, moved to my other side. Devin and Tariq positioned themselves nearby, a protective circle of my chosen family surrounding me as I finally spoke my truth without apology. My father looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting around at the interested faces of the other gallery patrons. "Elizabeth," he said quietly to my mother, "perhaps this isn't the place." To my surprise, Ethan spoke up. "They're right, Mom. There's a problem here and we need to acknowledge it." My mother turned to him, betrayal written on her face. "Ethan, you know we've always done our best." "For me, yes," he agreed. "But not for Maya. I didn't see it clearly until her accident, but it's been there all along. The difference in how you treat us." His unexpected support brought tears to my eyes. It was the first time anyone in my family had acknowledged the disparity without qualification or excuse. My mother looked from Ethan to me, then to the artwork surrounding us, the visual record of pain I had carried for so long. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes, a brief acknowledgement of truth. But then her walls went back up. "I won't stand here and be publicly humiliated," she declared. "If you wanted to address family concerns, Maya, you could have done so privately, not through this." She gestured dismissively at my artwork. "This is how I process my experiences," I said simply. "Through art, it's who I am, something you might know if you had ever taken a genuine interest in my life." "We're leaving," my mother announced, turning on her heel. My father hesitated, looking torn, but ultimately followed her. Ethan remained his expression apologetic. "I'm sorry," he said when they had gone. "I didn't realize it would go this way." "I did," I admitted. "But I'm glad you stayed." He looked at the artwork again, taking his time with each piece. "These are powerful, Maya. They made me understand what it's been like for you, in a way your words never quite could." "That's what art does," I said. "It communicates what can't always be put into words." We talked more that evening, Ethan and I beginning a new kind of relationship based on honest recognition of our shared past but different experiences. He wasn't responsible for our parents' behavior, but his willingness to acknowledge it felt like a first step toward healing a rift that had existed our entire lives. The gallery showing marked a turning point in multiple ways. Professionally, it introduced me to a community of artists and opened doors I hadn't known existed. Personally, it allowed me to publicly claim my experience, without shame or apology, to stand in my truth, even when those who had hurt me refused to acknowledge it. My parents returned to Minneapolis the next day without contacting me again. 2 weeks later, I received a stiff email from my mother expressing her disappointment in my public airing of family matters and suggesting that when I was ready to discuss things maturely, I could call them. I didn't call. Instead, I continued focusing on my recovery, my work, and my newfound artistic voice. The Invisible series led to another showing then interest from a small publishing house in creating a visual memoir about family dynamics and healing. 1 year after the accident, I walked without assistance, though my legs still ached in cold weather, and would always bear the scars and metal hardware that held it together. I had moved to a new apartment, a light-filled space with a small studio where I could work on my graphic design projects during the day and my personal art in the evenings. My relationship with my parents remained distant, but civil occasional phone calls, perfunctory holiday exchanges, the minimum maintenance required to avoid complete estrangement. I had stopped expecting what they couldn't give, stopped hoping for recognition they weren't capable of offering. What I had gained, however, was far more valuable than what I had lost. A deeper connection with my brother who made efforts to understand my perspective and to forge a relationship independent of our parents' influence. A stronger bond with my chosen family, who had proven their love through presence and support when it mattered most. And perhaps most importantly, a clearer sense of my own worth no longer dependent on external validation from people who had consistently failed to provide it. The car accident had broken my body, but it had also broken patterns of denial and accommodation that had limited me for years. In healing from physical trauma, I had also begun healing from the emotional wounds of a lifetime of invisibility. My story doesn't have a perfect resolution. My parents didn't suddenly transform into the supportive, attentive parents I had always wished for, but I transformed. I learned to define family by actions rather than blood, to recognize love in presence rather than obligation. The empty hospital room in my artwork remained a powerful symbol of abandonment, but it was no longer the end of the story. It was simply one chapter in a longer narrative of self-discovery and reclamation, a painful but necessary step toward building a life where I was never invisible again. Have you ever experienced a defining moment that showed you where you truly stand? With someone, I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. Sometimes sharing these painful realizations helps others feel less alone in similar situations. If my story resonated with you, please subscribe to hear more and hit that like button to help others find this video. Remember that family isn't always defined by blood. Sometimes it's the people who show up when you need them most. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I hope it helps you value those who truly see you in your life.